evening, Western Standard viewers, and welcome to Hannaford, a weekly politics show of the Western Standard. It's Thursday, October the 30th. Next Tuesday, Canadian Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne presents Canada's first budget in more than 18 months. They're supposed to be once a year. And the conventional wisdom is that there's no money, few choices, and a record deficit is likely. With me today is our old friend, Yaroslav Baran, co-founder of the Pendulum Group, and in a past life, a communications director to Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Welcome to the show, Yaroslav.
Always good to be here, Nigel. Thanks.
Yaroslav, Mr. Carney was out there last week managing expectations for his budget, calling for sacrifice, and so on. I don't like the sound of that. How bad do you think it's going to be, and for whom exactly is it going to be worst?
Well, it all depends on your point of view, and also lots of it depends on political spin. For example, people decry excess deficit spending as a bad thing, but those same people might be convinced that generational strategic investments are a good thing. Same thing. It's all about the packaging. So is this going to be a huge deficit budget, or is it going to be a generational investment budget? It's all in the eye of the beholder. But look, there are going to be winners and losers, that's for sure. And it's going to be an unusual budget, Nigel, in that, ironically, it's going to be both an austerity budget and a big spending budget. Traditionally, budgets will fall into one of two categories. Either an austerity budget, when governments try to get deficits under control, or the opposite extreme, what I like to call the Christmas tree budget. Usually you get those before an election, a gift for everybody under the tree, spread the wealth. This one is going to be a hybrid of those two approaches. And here's what I mean by that. It's going to be deep spending, Nigel, in very targeted areas: defense, housing, nation building infrastructure, and relief for sectors hard hit by Trump tariffs. But outside those four categories is going to be pretty scant spending, if not cuts. It's going to be a lot of not now or even cuts. And for the public service, for example, definitely cuts. This is the budget that introduces an expected 7.5% budget haircut across the board, across government departments.
Well, now, you mentioned defense as being one of the areas likely to see an immediate investment. My recollection of our time in Ottawa was that it was one thing to say you were going to spend money and even to allocate it. It was another to actually buy the equipment that you said you were going to buy. It's easy enough to give the troops a pay raise, and I believe that's in the works. But in terms of actually taking delivery of ships, aircraft, and the other guns, for that matter, it's one thing to say, and it's another to do it. So how quickly do you think that particular investment could actually start to make a difference?
Well, the government made a commitment that is going to hit 2% of gross domestic product value in defense spending by March 31st of next year. I'll believe it when I see it, because you're quite right. Our armed forces have been depleted to the point where we don't even really have the receptor capacity to spend more, even if we want to. And you're quite right in noting the pay raises. By and large, there's an average pay raise of 20% across the armed forces. I'm not complaining about that at all. Lord knows they deserve it. They're the ones who work hard, serve this country more than anybody else, and often put their lives on the line for their fellow Canadians. But that's the lowest hanging fruit. You can, with the stroke of a pen, you can spend a whole lot of money giving people pay raises. It's harder to actually recruit, retain, re-equip, and get stuff delivered between now and March 31st. So, for example, recruitment. The armed forces are depleted so much that even the recruitment centers are understaffed. They can put a help wanted sign, but there's nobody to actually process the new recruits. So it's pretty bad, and it's going to be a real aggressive move to try to hit that defense spending target.
Well, if that's true of the defense spending, is it also true of the other things which you were talking about as major accomplishments and major investments that the budget would bring forward?
That's going to be a little bit tougher for the government to manage alone. I mean, infrastructure investments by and large are going to be partnerships with the private sector. And in fact, most of that investment is going to be coming from the private sector. The government's role is largely going to be to clear away red tape, to streamline approvals, and in some significant cases, investing billions as well. But government doesn't have the agency to do that alone. So it's going to be a bit of a dance, and how quickly can they get their collective act together to get shovels in the ground and get to project completion? Say even within the lifetime of this parliament. I don't know.
Well, Yaroslav, one way that they could get things rolling fairly quickly is to authorize pipelines. We have an industry here in Alberta that's ready to go, and amazingly, Bill Gates has just walked back the importance of climate change. He says it's not going to kill us anymore. It's important, but other things are more important. Mr. Gates and Mr. Carney think alike in a lot of ways. I think they know each other fairly well. Do you think Mr. Carney is going to take any permission from Mr. Gates to actually change his stance? Let's get rid of the no pipelines bill and the tanker ban and number of other things, emissions cap, that are holding the industry back.
Yeah, there must be something in the water, because everybody is suddenly starting to sound a lot more like a conservative, aren't they? Bill Gates is saying, no, it's no longer a 9-alarm fire. We need to focus more on green energy, greening industry, but not being anti-industry, anti-development. We're hearing a lot of the same kind of stuff from Mark Carney. I mean, heaven knows, compared to Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney sounds like a conservative. He wants to build stuff. He wants to get back into the natural resources game in Canada. These are good signs. The question is, what will the delivery look like? Are we going to get these projects actually built? And you're quite right in noting some significant holdouts in policy change. As long as we have a tanker ban on the Pacific coast, then we can build all the pipelines we want. Not that we're building any yet, but we can build all the pipelines we want. But if you can't ship out of the West Coast, then what's the point? And the government of British Columbia currently is still adamantly opposed to making any changes to the tanker ban.
Well, they are, but in the end, it's not their call. So it needs a federal government, and I can't believe I'm saying this because I'm not a fan of overwhelming federal exercise of power. But the Constitution is pretty clear about whose decision it is that you do or you don't allow the tankers on the coast. So.
Yeah, and Nigel, we've been hearing a lot about the need to diversify our export markets. Asia is hungry for Canadian energy. If we want to get it to those Asian markets, we need to build those pipelines. We need to build those LNG compression terminals, and it's going to be through the West Coast. We're not going to ship LNG to Vietnam or China through the Port of Halifax. It's not going to happen. Doesn't make sense.
Now, Mr. Carney has been in power since the 14th of March. The day he was sworn in. That's more than 7 months. And other than the sleight of hand removal of carbon tax, taking it off the price at the pump and putting it on the upstream, and this sort of somewhat disingenuous announcement of 5 major projects through the Major Projects Office in July, we're already well on the way. What has Mr. Carney actually got to show for 7 months in office?
I'm going to try to be fair.
This is a time to try and be fair. A serious question.
Yeah. No, I always try to be fair. There's been a lot of architecture, but we're waiting for results. And, I don't consider establishing a new home building agency to be results. That is means to eventual results, but that's not results. That's not building new homes yet. So what has he done so far? The main accomplishment so far is, again, the new major projects office. This was the highlight of the spring and summer. They announced this new major projects office. Frankly, it was largely modeled after the old major project management office that was created by former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, largely for energy projects and natural resources project. So Mark Carney took Harper's template, expanded it a little bit, and so that's a big deal. But it is creating the ability to actually get results. It's not the same as getting results. I'm hopeful. I think it's heading in the right direction. The policy approach, the attitude towards development seems to have shifted. So I'm hopeful that this is gonna lead to stuff. Another thing that he's done is he's created the new home building agency, Build Canada Homes. Here again, he's built something, but that's not the same as actually as bricks and mortar are actually being delivered, or roofs delivered for Canadians who need homes. But on the policy direction with this one, I'm a little bit less impressed overall. And here's why. 95% of homes that are built in this country are built by the private sector. I would rather see tax incentives like accelerated cost depreciation, things like that will prime the pump of the private sector, coupled with zoning reform and streamlined approvals, to let the private sector do what it does best, which is go, go, go. Instead, we're seeing a new agency that's basically going to act as a crown developer to directly build new homes and repurpose old built. It seems a little bit like a 1970s approach that it must be the state that is the agent of all good. I don't subscribe to that economic model. So have they done it? Yes. Is it starting to do it to apply its craft and build homes? Yeah, they announced their first major project, but ask me again when we actually see walls and roofs delivered to house Canadians. Beyond that, I'd say major. Oh, sorry. You wanted to jump in on that one.
I was going to ask you whether so they've got a new project going. Have they found a way to get around the municipal restrictions, which in so many cases are what is really holding back the delivery of new homes?
Yeah, that's going to take ongoing negotiations with not directly municipalities, because that'd be kind of outside constitutional norms, with the provinces as intermediaries to deal with municipalities. And some of it is zoning restrictions. That's true, but the biggest problem, by and large, from what I hear from municipalities, is they want to build homes too, because they're the ones on the front lines of a housing crisis. So municipalities tend to want to build homes too. Their problem is investments in critical infrastructure, things like water, wastewater treatment, sewer systems, the kind of stuff you need to build homes. You can't take a field and build homes on it. You can build a cottage on a field. You can't build a home on a field. You need sewer, you need hydro lines, you need all of that core infrastructure that makes a residential, 4-season home a home. And municipalities simply do not have the resources to do that. Municipalities by law are not permitted to run deficits. They can't incur debt. They don't have the tax base to be able to invest in major critical infrastructure. That's where the federal government comes in. And that's going to be a pretty important role for provincial governments and federal governments to allow municipalities to unleash home building.
I think you're being very generous to some of the municipalities, at least. The line is that in Vancouver, there's something like $800,000 of any new house goes to the city of Vancouver in various fees and development charges. And the land, the bricks, the mortar, the wood, they cost this. Tack on another 800,000.
Yeah.
So
there are outliers. Some municipalities are more problematic than others. But also the reason they charge these development charges is theoretically that's how they build that. That's how they connect new homes to grids, to water and wastewater and sewage and whatever, because the provinces and the federal government have not been contributing enough to make that possible. So, I did. Part of me feels for the municipalities, because they're trying to do what they can with one hand tied behind their back, because they don't have the tax base. The federal government does. It's what do they use it on? Do they use it wisely on not exactly sexy stuff like building new or upgrading sewage systems? But that's the kind of stuff that's most needed.
Okay, now, as long as we're in a segment of the show where we're going to be fair, I want to run something past you that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said very recently. I think he put this out as a tweet, that if Mark Carney had kept his promise to handle Trump, and negotiate a win, and get a deal by July the 21st, we would not be facing the latest tariff hike. Now, of course, this is a little background to this. Mr. Ford, Premier of Ontario, in my opinion, recklessly put out a provocative ad. It wasn't so much the ad itself, but the fact that he chose to do it at all that was provocative. And, of course, President Trump responded by guillotining any process that might have been in progress. Now, Mr. Poilievre says if Mr. Carney had kept his promise to handle Trump, we wouldn't be dealing with this. Do you think that's a fair criticism? Nobody handles Trump.
Well, but you know what? I do think that's a fair criticism, and it's not so much a comment on Mark Carney's failure. It's more a comment on Mark Carney himself having set unrealistic expectations for his own government. He himself set the bar where it is. He won the election as the self-proclaimed Trump whisperer. He said, elect me, I'll be able to handle this. I can tame the beast. Canada will be okay in terms of trade relations with the United States if you elect me, and a continuation of liberal governance. So Mark Carney himself said, I'm going to be the savior. Elect me, I'll get it done. And he hasn't yet. So there's got to be some accountability for setting the bar. So much in politics, as you know, Nigel, so much of it comes down to expectation management. And in this case, I think he did the opposite of what one ought to have done in a volatile kind of dealing with Trump world. We all know that Donald Trump can wake up one morning and say, yeah, sure, negotiations with Canada back on. And then on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, he could wake up again and say, no, forget Canada. That's a reality. So why on earth, politically, would you set the kind of expectations of elect me and I'll get this done by Christmas, no problem, and we'll all go have a beer together?
Well, I want to run by you a crazy conspiratorial theory. The news reports indicate that Mr. Ford showed Mr. Carney these ads before he ran them, and Mr. Carney didn't tell him not to. They must both have realized that quoting Ronald Reagan, whether done accurately or with selective editing, was going to be like poking a stick into Mr. Trump's ear. And yet they went ahead and did it anyway, with the predictable result that things are shut down. Right before Mr. Carney goes to the APEC conference in South Korea and meets his old Chinese friends. Couldn't get a deal with the Americans. The Chinese were more than pleased to see us. Do you think there's something going on
with China? Oh, geez. China's a tough one. And look, it's a really tough nut to crack. And the prime minister is meeting with Chinese President Xi. But this follows several years of deep freeze in relations, as you know, prompted by a major foreign interference scandal, state kidnapping of 2 Canadian diplomats, extraterritorial harassment of Chinese Canadians on our shores. But China is also our second biggest trading partner after the US. And as we see volatility, unpredictability, and trade hostility from the US, there are understandably going to be voices and public sentiment in Canada saying that we should re-engage with China, we should trade more with China as a hedge. And overall, there's a push from the government and from the public at large to diversify export markets because of all this stuff with Trump. So it kind of makes sense that he's going to China, our second biggest trading partner, saying, let's try to get things back on track and trade more. But also, let's get some perspective. Our trade with the United States is at least 10 times greater than our trade with China. You cannot offset that overnight. You can't offset in a decade, let alone overnight. And so for all the talk and energy into expanding non-US markets, how much can we really shift to China? And do we really want to? Because remember, 3 years ago, when the government launched its Indo-Pacific strategy, it was all about moving away from China and largely towards India. But then, of course, the excrement hit the fan. Our relations with India also sunk to rock bottom. So it really creates a problem. We want to diversify, but the countries that we see as the biggest diversifying potential aren't really that reliable either. And don't forget that China is not as predictable and stable as they let on. China has been very notorious, especially vis-a-vis Canada, for waking up one morning and saying, oh, we don't like your hogs, we don't like your pork, we're banning them, or we don't like your canola. And it's never about viruses or weevils or whatever they try to pin it on. It is always geopolitical.
China, well, what about it? I mean, they dropped the tariffs on canola, and as the Americans have taken their motor industry back, we have to take Chinese cars. Is that the deal that's coming up?
That's what they've pitched. I mean, the Chinese have explicitly said this to several of our premiers and to our federal government. You drop the Canadian tariffs on electric vehicles from China, and suddenly your canola will magically be safe again, and let the trade roll. So that's not any more reliable in terms of a rules-based, stable trade environment than the kind of stuff we've been seeing with Trump over the last half year.
Yaroslav, we're fast running out of time here, I'm afraid. But let's get to the big question here in Alberta. Danielle Smith gave Mr. Carney 6 months to meet Alberta's demands. We've heard it all before: getting rid of the anti-pipeline laws, the tanker ban, much else. Does Gates's recent withdrawal of his enthusiasm for climate change narrative give Mr. Carney room to move? And related to that, is this budget when we get to decide whether Mr. Carney is doing a good job? When will we know that Canadians picked or didn't pick the right person earlier this year?
It's back to, look, am I holding my breath for the tanker ban to be lifted anytime soon? I'll be stunned if that's in next week's budget. Some of the anti-development legislation that's the legacy of the Justin Trudeau government. I think that Mark Carney thinks he is fixing that. Is he fixing enough of it, and is he doing it quickly enough? Some of this is technical questions. We'll see what the development community, we'll see what the private sector says. Do they feel that they're empowered to do what they do best under a Mark Carney, legal and regulatory regime? Time will tell. Is this the budget where we get to start giving Mark Carney a report card? Probably a little bit too early. We're half a year into the government post-election, but this government should contain some important signals about the policy direction. In some respects, I've been impressed with the direction this government is heading in terms of incentivizing major projects, allowing the private sector to do what it does, allowing major projects to go forward. But we haven't seen the results yet. We've seen, in some cases, some shovels almost ready to go into the ground. But ask me again when we start to see some of these major projects coming to completion, how smooth the process was and how quickly it happened.
So how long do we give him?
Well, the reason we have 4-year election terms is that's a reasonable life cycle to be able to give somebody a report card. But again, Mr. Carney and his team have set the bar really high. Let's see if they can meet that bar that they were pretty confident in themselves in.
Okay. Yaroslav, I think I'll believe it when I see a formation of F-35s doing a low pass at the Abbotsford Air Show.
Yeah.
But anyway, right now we don't have them, and we do have Mr. Carney, and we have a budget. We have a trade negotiation to complete. Every time you come on, I always feel a little wiser at the end.
Oh.
So thank you very much for your perspectives today.
My
And,
pleasure, Nigel.
For the Western Standard, I'm Nigel Hannaford.